Welcome into today's instructional video, everybody. Hopefully, you guys are all doing well and ready for some chess. Today, I'm going to be talking about game number 6 from the 2014 Millionaire Open. Let me just get some background music on here, real quick. Bear patiently with me. Um, Also, guys, I just wanted to make a very, very quick apology to you guys. I know I said I was going to be posting at least one YouTube video every day. Um, and yes, things can happen in life that come up to make that not able to happen. But part of the issue with that is actually not my fault, as a couple of times I've gone lately to post videos and have run into issues of internet connection um, because of the place I'm living right now, not allowing me to drop those videos. So that's happened 2 times. Both times I actually had videos for the day ready to post, but I was not able to post them until the next day. You may have noticed that is the day, those are both the days that I posted um, multiple videos in a day. So both of these videos were actually ready to go and drop a few days ago, actually. So that's the issue with that. So I am going to be covering the 2014 Millionaire Open. I had the white pieces. Kind of a up and down tournament for me. Winning the first game in a 100-point upset, losing the second game, just playing really well initially, and then making just really bad strategical decisions. I kind of leveled out in the middle and drew 2 games against some pretty strong opponents. But one of those games I still should have won. So that's a little disappointing. And now I'm sitting at, a win, 2 draws, and 2 losses with 2 games to go. So at this point, most people who haven't withdrawn from a tournament are still planning on playing the last 2 games. You're just trying to focus on finishing it on a high. So I had the white pieces. And I was going for another birds opening. Like I've said multiple times lately, F4 was my primary weapon for years in tournament games. F4 was all I played, and one of the benefits of that was I was able to get it down to a system where I was very comfortable strategy wise of what I wanted to accomplish. I didn't make as many of those obvious blunders because of the repetition of the positions I was seeing. Since then, I've moved on. I play a couple different lines for white, but 2014, I was just a F4 player with the white pieces. So D5 is one of the main lines, Knight F3, and C5. Typically, you're going to see C5 from players who are probably Sicilian players. It's very natural. Now that you can't play E5, you're going to go for like C5, Knight C6. The bishop is going to come somewhere. Or black's going to play E6 and block that bishop in. I prefer to play against the variations where this bishop is not out and active because they're a little more easy to play. So what you want to do is you want to play E3. Again, white is fighting for control of this crucial E5 square. Black has signified that he's probably going to put his knight on C6. And when that happens, you want to have bishop B5 at your disposal. Because if you're able to eliminate this knight on C6, you have nothing keeping you out of E5. It's very simple chess. Alright, bishop B5. And this is where a lot of games can get interesting. And I think a lot of people underestimate white's ideas in this position. Okay, so bishop d7. So my opponent breaks the pin. Not sure if he's familiar with how likely I am to play bishop takes c6, or this position in general. You can allow bishop takes c6 in a scenario where the pawn has to take. And black will have the bishop pair. Black will have the bishop pair. And a comfortable position, but white actually does get good play against those queenside pawns, the double C pawns and the isolated A pawn. And in some scenarios, you would just want to take that. You could just take that position, trade equal for equal, and go straight to an endgame and have amazing chances of winning that endgame, just straight up. A lot of people I've discovered will not even break this absolute pin on the knight with bishop d7. They'll play bishop g4. They'll play bishop f5, something along those lines. But my opponent in this game played bishop d7. So he breaks the pin, basically saying if you take on c6, I can actually take with the bishop and avoid damaging my pawn structure. I play b3. The idea behind b3 is to take control of this long dark square diagonal. A1 to h8 with the bishop on b2. The bishop on b2 will also fight for control over this crucial e5 square. I'll show you why that's important at a later point. And now e6. So black is just making room for his bishop to come to d6 or e7 or knight f6. The strongest way black can play against the bird's opening is actually to play g6 and bishop g7 himself. Sometimes even when f4 is played, you'll play g6. And then white might actually have to switch up his move order if he wants to put the bishop on b2. Because on f4, g6, right away, black is saying, I'm going to be the first to play bishop g7. Which is also a very, very strong way of playing this for black. Okay, but I am the first on this long diagonal, bishop b2, knight f6, and castles. So as you can see, we have nice control over this e5 square with our knight, our pawn, and our bishop. And the one piece from black that's defending the e5 square can come off the board at any point. Bishop e7, and bishop takes c6. Nowadays, I would probably prefer to wait till my opponent plays a move like a6 before making this decision. But in this game, I opted to take on c6 right away. And then on bishop c6, play the move knight e5. Believe it or not, guys, I actually get a fair amount of people who put the bishop on d7. And when you see that on bishop d7, you would assume they want to take on c6 with the bishop. If they get the opportunity to avoid those double pawns. I'll have a lot of people play bishop d7 and then play b takes c6 still. For some odd reason. That's one thing I will never really understand that I see a lot in this opening. Because otherwise, if you're going to play bishop d7, but you're not going to take on c6, why would you not try to get that bishop to a more active square, f5 or g4, then play e6? That's one thing I don't understand. Now we want to play knight e5. And this knight is very nice, shooting straight into black's position. And he has nothing to challenge it on this e5 square. I have great control over it. But as nice as this knight is, guys, the undervalued idea here for white is knight c6, messing up those pawns. And a lot of people would probably think as black, well, why would white want to take my bishop on c6? You know, the knight is so good on e5. But there's actually concrete reasons why this can actually be a very strong move as well. Rook c8 and d3. Why d3? Usually we want the knight to go to d2. If we go to c3, we open up ourselves to d4. Opening this diagonal for black, and it gets a little awkward to play with the white pieces if you're not careful. So playing d3 first, and then knight d2 keeps the bishop open on this diagonal, and means that black will not gain a tempo on our knight with d4. Castles, knight d2, and b6. So I think at this point what black is saying is, I have the two bishops. If you're not going to take on c6 now, I'm going to drop this bishop back here somewhere, and I'm just going to have complete control over these light squares. And that could actually cause my king a little bit of discomfort. So even though I'm not messing up his pawns anymore, I did opt to take his bishop. I did opt to take his bishop, and this game is very different from a lot of birds opening games I've played over the years. Because usually I'm playing with a strategical idea of playing against double C pawns and an isolated A pawn, and obviously that is not going on in this position. Black has no structural weaknesses. And he's actually doing fine right here. But I really like how I capitalized and came up with some good ideas to win this game. Queen e2, the idea just gives some space for both of the rooks. And now knight d7. So black is signifying that he wants to play bishop f6. And he wants to start fighting for this diagonal. The idea of bishop f6 also, on top of the fact that he's hitting our unprotected bishop, is that he might play e5 himself, which would be very active. So at this point, as white, you've got to figure the bishops are probably going to come off the board. It doesn't make much sense for black to play bishop f6 and for you to play like rook a b1, because he can just take your bishop with his bishop that wasn't doing very much, and then the rook is going to be awkward on b2. It's not really where we want our rook. So knowing that's coming, I played e4, another useful aspect of playing d3. And now bishop f6 was played. And here there's a couple different options. We can take on f6 first, and then push e5. I know that when we take on f6, he's going to take with a piece. The knight, probably the knight. The queen is possible, but I don't think it's as likely. But the other idea is to push, which is what I played. So on one hand, we are blocking our dark square bishop's diagonal. But on another hand, we're telling black, your bishop on f6 doesn't really have a whole lot of squares to go to. In fact, e7 is practically... Bishop h4, there's g3, and then the bishop just has to go back passively. But it's not just about this bishop on f6. It's also taking away the f6 square from the knight. So it makes both of these pieces awkward. And yes, we are blocking our bishop on b2, but we can redeploy our bishop at a later point to c1. And albeit, even though it's a slow strategy, there are options for our bishop. Right now, black has to save his bishop. And I played rook f3, signifying that I want to play a move like rook h3 and start to put some pressure on his king's side. And f6 is very, very natural. So now black is saying, I am going to put pressure on this e5 point. I'm going to make my knight useful. And I'm going to force you to make a decision here about how you want to play this position. And I really liked the idea I came up with in this position. Because I played rook h3 for... Okay, I'm not actually as big a fan of that move. What I came up with here in a second. The idea of this move is to just continue and play queen h5. Doubling down on h7 and try to provoke him to play h6. And create some more targets and holes around his king. But he played queen e8. So he's saying, I'm comfortable if you play queen h5, I'm just going to trade queens. And play this position. And he is comfortable in that scenario. But I played knight f3. My idea is I'm going to continue to fight for this e5 square. And I want black to be the one to take on e5. I want black to be the one to take on e5. I'm not going to rush and take on f6 when it doesn't benefit me. My opponent's rook is not necessarily useful, so he drops it on c6, so he drops it to c8. And I bring the rook to the e file. My reasoning is, once I take on f6, I want to have my queen and my rook lined up against this e pawn. That e6 pawn could be a big target for me in the position. Something I can go after, and it's a potential weakness because it can't move. It can't move right now, and it can't be protected by another pawn. So my opponent feels obligated to take, and this is really where I started kind of taking control of this game. I played bishop takes e5. Now my opponent is left with this backwards e6 pawn that he's going to have to protect with pieces. He tried to play bishop f6, and now my advantage just skyrockets. After the move bishop d6, I am attacking his rook on f8. and I'm threatening to come in and capture a pawn on e6. My opponent played rook f7, and I opted to play knight e5. I'm not sure why I didn't just jump in right away and take that pawn on e6. I should have just taken that pawn on e6, but I decided that knight e5 was the move I wanted to play, and that gives up pretty much all of my initiative. Queen e6 was the right decision there. My opponent takes, and I took on e5. One of the things is, guys, it was round 6 of a 7-round tournament, and like I said in the first video, I'd never played in a 7-round tournament. I've also never played, you know, six people of my level in a tournament, much less 7. So everybody is in the 18, 19, almost 2,000 range in this event. So maybe I was just fatigued, and I just simply missed that queen takes e6 just wins a pawn. Anyway, bishop e5, and queen e5. And now we can see that even though material is equal, black is going to be pinned down to defending against this e6 pawn. Right now he's saying, well, if you take, in some line, queen takes, rook takes, I'm going to take on f4. The difference is I am going to be able to play g3 at some point and protect this pawn. And he can't protect his e6 pawn with an actual pawn. So my idea is to triple up and then play g3 so that he has no target on f4 to go after. And then just win that e6 pawn. Rook f6, defending the e6 pawn. It's still saying I've got some pressure here as well. I opted to triple up. Very, very powerful position for my 2 rooks and queen. And my opponent played queen f7. So he's opening up the e8 square to protect this e6 pawn. He is also doubling down on the f4 pawn, trying to create some sort of active counterplay against my threats. But like I said, g3 and this f4 pawn is protected. Now if he goes rook f5, we just take on e6 and we're up a pawn for no reason. Our rooks are dominating the position and we shouldn't have any issues. And now rook f8. And rook f8. And after my next few moves, my opponent is in big trouble. Queen d6. The queen steps out of the way of the rook's pressure on e6. Now we have 3 attackers. My opponent has 2 defenders. He has no active counterattacking plan. So he's either just got to swallow the pawn or go passive with rook e8, which is what he opted to play. But this allows a beautiful move that kind of just signifies the strength of my position. I'll give you a second to find it. Alright, for those of you guys who found the move, queen takes d5, oh my goodness. Sacrificing the queen, which we're obviously going to get back. We got our extra pawn. Black does not really have a choice but to take and go down a pawn. Rook e8, the other useful aspect of our rooks being doubled. My opponent has no choice but to sacrifice his queen for a rook, or block the check. Obviously, we're just going to take the queen in that line as well. Rook takes e8 and king f7. And so from a position of great strength, this has morphed into a position where white is up a pawn. Not only just up a pawn though, guys, I have complete control over the e-file. And why is that a big deal? Because my opponent in some lines might like to play, after I go rook e5, say he's able to push this pawn here, he might want to play rook e6. But he's down a pawn, so that will be entering a losing position. So my rook is always going to be posted up dominantly on the e-file, and my opponent will never be able to counter with rook e6, because that'll enter into an easily winning pawn position for me. And so I'm just going to be able to slowly but surely move my king up. And that is enough to win this position. The other thing that can be said about rook endgames is a lot of times being up a pawn is not enough. You need to have some other big advantage in order to win that game. So My opponent has to play d4 or put his rook in a passive position on d6 defending. And now we bring the king forward. We don't rush anything. King f2. Again, black cannot play rook e6. That's an easy winning endgame for us. His king cannot come over to any of these squares. So he's in a very passive position where all he can really do is just shuffle his rook or move pawns and just wait. So he tries to be active with rook h6. We just played pawn h4. We want to gain space on this side of the board anyway. We might be able to use this 3 pawns versus 2 at some point as an advantage. Maybe I'll even think about playing h5 and eliminate more squares from this h6 rook. Rook d6, my opponent just passively shuffles. Now we bring the king in. My opponent shuffles again. a4. We want to limit our opponent's play and then move in. a5. King e4. And so on top of the fact that we have complete control over this e-file, this king is very passive and our king is very active. This is going to be enough to win the game. Now we just need to create a target somewhere. So I played, after rook g6, I simply stepped back. Now I want to play g4. And I want to continue to push these pawns forward and gain space. Rook h6. So now if I go g4, he plays rook h4, and he's back in the game. h5. Now his rook can't go to g6. It's limited to f6, d6, and c6. Obviously, again, rook e6. Now it's even easier to win because our king is much more active and we're up a pawn. We'll just swap the rooks off. Rook f6, g4. And as you can see, we have continued to slowly but surely make progress. And now I want the king to come into e4, and I'm just going to continue to push him back. Eventually, at some point, I will be able to force through the win. But we're not rushing it. King g5, gaining space. And now my opponent says, you can't go, I'm not going to let you go any further. I'm going to play g6 and challenge your pawns. And I played king g4 and basically saying, if you take on h5, my king is on the 6th rank and yours is on the 7th, passively defending. Your rook can't go anywhere. I'm just going to play f5 and I'm going to create a passer of some sort. f5, maybe f6, bring my rook into the 7th. This is over with proper play, guys, but you don't want to rush it. Rook c6, just shuffling. And the move f5. So there's a few different ways you can try to win this position for white. Again, this is completely winning. My opponent plays rook d6. I opted to take on g6. My opponent has to take back. And then if we take on g6, my opponent has kind of a blockade established. So you want to play f6. The idea of f6 is we want to go rook e7. King is going to have to become even more passive. And then just rook g7. Take on g6. We have the f and g pawns. We're up 2 pawns. That's winning. Again, notice how we haven't... Sorry. Again, notice we haven't really rushed anything here in this position. Okay. Sorry, let me get back. f6. Now he needs to stop my rook to e7. And now we move the king towards the middle of the board. I offered a rook exchange here. Yes, I am giving back the pawn. Rook e7, f e7, king e7. But after king e5, my king is just so much more active, and I'm going to be able to win either the g6 pawn or the b6 pawn. My opponent's not going to be able to have any counterplay. So he cannot trade rooks, even though he's getting that extra pawn back. He tries to keep me cut out. I repeated rook e5, offering a winning rook trade. And then I target the b6 pawn. If he goes passive with rook b7, my king can finally come into e5. Slowly but surely, guys, I'm just gaining. It's been winning for a while. My opponent opts to let me have the b6 pawn and says, I'm going to try to go down with activity, but at this point, he's just 2 pawns behind. So it's just a matter of simple technique. He attacks, I attack. He takes, I take. He attacks 2 pawns. I move my rook out of the way of this a-pawn, saying, if you take, that's fine. I'm just going to push. And even though I've given back some of my material, I am still completely winning this. Okay, we trade. Now I bring my king this way. And now crucial after rook b4 that there's rook c4. Otherwise my opponent actually might have a few chances. But now the king, the rook protects the pawn first, and then my king comes over. The rook interposes and gets in the way. And now it's just a matter of technique. And my opponent here finally surrendered. I was very, very proud walking away from this game. The only thing I am disappointed with myself in is why did I not play queen takes e6? Just winning a pawn. Maybe I was moving too quickly. Maybe I was fatigued. You know, didn't see it. But I felt like this was a very, very well played endgame. I never gave my opponent any chances. And for those of you who might not know how would this finish? How would this finish? We're going to push a7. And if our opponent plays rook a1, we'll just play rook a5. Getting in the way. And get ready to push through our queen. He has some checks. But we're just going to keep bringing our king towards his rook. Then we're going to attack it. His rook will have to come to the 8th rank. And then when we queen, he sacrifices it for the queen. But we're up a rook and a pawn. And we're going to win that position. So, very, very fun 6th game. So this gets me to a score of 2 wins, 2 draws, and 2 losses. Headed into round 7. And yeah, a lot of confidence definitely in this game. Just with how clean it was, other than missing queen e6. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think the end game would probably be the most instructional part of this game. On how to win a position like this. I would encourage you guys to not rush. Look at the position, figure out what your advantages are. Obviously, white had more advantages than just the extra pawn, but you still can't rush those types of things. You got to be patient. Anyway, I'll be back with Game 7 later. Hopefully you enjoyed this. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching and supporting. Appreciate you guys.